So the position of the case studies in FOODSECURE is, I think, twofold. I see FOODSECURE as a project that addresses the global agenda, and it informs EU policymaking on food security. Now, what we want to avoid is that in the end our perceptions of, or our perspectives on European policies are not going to be rooted or grounded in the realities on the ground in the countries that deal with food insecurity. So the case studies in that respect are important for ground-proofing our concepts and our policy perspectives. But because FOODSECURE project also delves into understanding the causalities of FNS, there are a number of case studies that are going to be exploring some of the general mechanisms in explaining food security outcomes on the ground and with empirical data from household level data, from data on farming systems, and from data on policy making. So I think that the case studies play the double role of both informing our concepts and doing the ground proofing. In terms of a framework for these case studies, we haven't invested so much in coming up with a good, concise, and coherent framework for these case studies, which has to do with the fact that they address so many different topics, I assume. But we do have from the very start of the project, a line of thinking where we have country typologies. Some of them have also been made operational with data. We have invested a lot of effort into a conceptual framework that has helped us think about the interplay of global policies or EU policies and food security outcomes. And there's a particular work package on policy coherence and alignment that we will see some results from today. So this is our country typology that we use to think about the case study selection, based on a basic factor analysis with just a few dimensions that are listed here below. We have identified a few countries with overlapping food security concerns. This is within a set of, this has been made operational within a set of 40 countries that were selected within food security from the very start. And the different colors represent your different categories. So I'll be informing you how we score on these different country groups. This is then, of course, our conceptual framework, which lists in the bottom the EU policies that affect this system and that affect the vulnerability or the status and the stability of food insecurity. But it hasn't pinpointed so far the domestic policies in this particular scheme. So the way I see these case studies is that they should be helping us to pinpoint and make this scheme more elaborate to see how these EU policies will then interact with the domestic policies. And then the third framework, if you like, is what Lara presented for us in Vienna on their work planned in Work Package 10, which is to think about the different dimensions of policy coherence for development. There is a lot of work in the project to examine the different policy domains in the EU that affect food security. So any kind of coordination between those policy domains will help to achieve horizontal policy coherence for development. When we think about the case studies, we are perhaps more in the arena of alignment, where we are looking for a coherence between what the EU policies are and how they affect the policy strategies in the regions. So this alignment is another theme that I imagine will be picked up or will be informed by some of the case studies. And we can even when we go more into case studies that examine the policy making or the decision making process or the process of allocation of EU aid funds, then there is the question of vertical coherence, where the EU Commission as a basic, as a major funder, will be looking for a way to harmonize their particular spendings with that of the major donors in the member states. And I think that some of the work that we'll see today will also address that. And coming back on a diagram that Joachim showed us yesterday, here I think that particularly in this alignment, what we see is that some of the European Commission spending is in the developing countries is affecting some of the, is trying to improve on some of the basic causes like market functioning in developing countries, and that gives the case studies as well a kind of entry point into improving this concept or into elaborating this concept. Now, I compiled an overview of the case studies that we have in FOODSECURE, and you need, of course, a definition for thinking about what case studies are. So what I used is basically to have a case study as an empirical analysis at the country or at the multi-country level or at a subnational level, in which the interplay of domestic and international policies is being examined with regard to the impact on one or more dimensions of food and nutrition security. And that is the definition of a case study that would be spot on for FOODSECURE, because this interplay of domestic and international policies is actually what we are discussing. But when you look critically at the type of case studies that we have, then you see that this some of them are informed by, are looking at domestic policies, and that was actually also how we map them under Work Package 4. So that's where you see the bulk of the papers. And what I would like to ask you is that when you do the write-up of these case studies or your analysis, that you keep an open eye on how on the interplay of these policies with the global or the European policies. So all in all, 20 case studies, and another way of defining them is who funds the case studies, because there are a number of studies that we initiated in FOODSECURE, but there is also relevant research that is linked very clearly to the FOODSECURE agenda, and that can be presented as part of the FOODSECURE research. So I think that this table is a bit of a dynamic table, can also be elaborated or added if you see that there are relevant case studies that fit our thinking and fit our framework. Then we can, and where you are involved, then I think that we should consider bringing this into the evidence base for FOODSECURE. We've seen, if I go to the list, we've seen the two case studies on food nutrition security in Europe. They were presented yesterday. I have thought that the work by Michel on technology and institutions, it can be regarded as a case study as well. We need to see if that holds. In terms of the proving of the volatility work, I have been presented with one case study, but there might actually be more. So I think that list is going to be expanded, and the same goes for the work on Work Package 8, I presume. In terms of the scenarios, much of our scenarios have been developed at the global level, but at least there are a number of studies that are going to be looking at country level scenarios. And I've listed here one that I know for sure that we are running within my own institute on Ghana. But certainly also there's work by David and Antoine within IFPRI that is examining specific country level scenarios. And some of that has been presented already in Vienna. And I think that can be added to our list of country studies. We'll be seeing some results of Work Package 9 case studies today, and as well as a case study for Work Package 10. So this is our overview. And another way to present this overview is in the country coverage. There we see that we are spending a lot of effort on Ethiopia, and rather unbalanced across these different groups of our country typology. There is some, so the groups 1, 2, and 5 are pretty well covered. We lack case studies on the group 6, which is the countries Niger, Malawi, or Zambia, and we have no case study yet on the group 7. And very limited work on Ghana and the group Ghana and the group with Brazil and China. Now, with Brazil and China, of course, we did our work earlier on in the project to examine the policies of these countries. I didn't list that as a case study because it didn't inform us yet on the, let's say, the causalities or on the choice of policies that could have a future potential impact on food security. But we can discuss that and see if we can bring a little bit more of that data into this framework. Okay. So first of all, I think it's just very interesting to see results of these case studies and have a good discussion about that. Some of them are near completion, others are already finished or are even going to be taking some more time to complete. What I'd like is if this discussion today can already give us some first ideas of the kind of synthesis that we can make across these case studies. I think that it might be interesting if we can have a few thought through statements about the interplay of European policies with domestic policies. I'm looking very much at Work Package 10 to deliver that for us, but certainly some of the other case studies will be informing that debate as well. So that's an important theme for synthesis that I see. A second one, which is difficult, but definitely something that can be thought about, is linking with modeling. Most of the case studies are at the micro level, the ones that we have here, so linking with the modeling is difficult. But in terms of themes, there are for sure some work to be taken up in Work Package 11 that will address or that will reflect on some of the dynamics that we are exploring in a case study. I'm thinking about the work on development aid, for example. So to me, it would be important to make sure that agenda is also informed by some of the results on a more micro or empirical level. Another way forward for the case studies is for the navigator. I think in the end, although we focused the navigator very much on EU policymakers, and we'll be talking much more about that this afternoon, what we see is that there will be so much interesting material in terms of causalities and policy perspectives in this navigator that it will be interesting for people outside Europe, and it should be. And a very appealing entry point into our material is, of course, the country perspective. So I'm very happy to bank on all the results and all the material from the case studies in the navigator in a way that we can add the country flavor and the country specific details in the navigator. I think that's really important. And the final one is something that we haven't talked so much about in the project, is to see if these lines of synthesis work well together, then it might also be an appealing way to think about publications of our case studies. Not so much then as, of course, within their own right, but also very much in in elaborating our analysis of this theme around the interplay of domestic and international policies. So it would be good to think about that today, or at least start getting some ideas about that in the discussions of today.